It's safe to say more than any other period in smartphone history, the past 2 or 3 years has seen smaller, more incremental updates. The gaps between new phone generations and the previous models are shrinking. And it's not just the flagships, the same is true in the mid-range market. Now, visually, there's quite a big difference between the Galaxy A54 and its predecessor, so that's something. It also has a brighter, better display, but does it move the needle enough? Or is this just a makeover for a pretty average mid-ranger? I'm Cam Bunton from Pocket-Lint, and this is our review of the Samsung Galaxy A54. If you do like it, please do leave a thumbs up, subscribe, and tap the notification bell, and then you don't miss any of our uploads. Now, like I said in the intro, the design has been completely revamped for the new A54. The narrow plastic-backed A53 has been replaced with a slightly wider glass-backed A54. Where the model from 2022 has a rectangular square look, the A54 is a lot more round, featuring more obviously rounded corners with a bezel around the display that's rounded to match it. It's very much a Galaxy S23 Lite in terms of styling. It features that same triple camera system on the back arranged in a neat line of individual protrusions, rather than having a collection of lenses in a raised island. It's a bit less refined than the S23, but the same approach is there. And it's a marked improvement on the previous model and actually looks good. It's pretty plain in white, but there are other colours too, like the much nicer looking lavender purple and lime green options. They're great looking phones. It's a pretty sturdy feeling device too, despite that plastic framing, and just like its predecessor, it features high water and dust resistance. Specifically, that's IP67 and means it can comfortably get through your daily accidents, whether that be getting caught in the rain or dropped in a sink full of water. It's quite a big device, it's wide and tall, and is just on the wrong side of the 200-gram mark, so it's not super lightweight. The glossy glass on the back also has a little bit of a habit of slipping from soft furniture. Moving on to talk displays, and it's safe to say the A54 has some lofty ambitions, and that, of all individual elements on the phone that make the phone an appealing option, it's the display that stands out. Samsung's increased the brightness from the last model and has delivered a big, vibrant, colour-rich panel that takes up nearly all the space on the front. It's saturated and shines in pretty much any condition. In fact, it's bright enough and has enough dynamic range that it's been certified for HDR10+ content. And it's more than sharp enough too, with a pixel density of over 400 pixels per inch on its Full HD panel. It means details are sharp and clean at arm's length. These qualities and its sheer scale at 6.4 inches mean it's an ideal panel for gaming and media consumption. It's bright enough that you can, for the most part, see it clearly outside in daylight, and it's vivid enough that movies and TV shows really pop on the screen. Our only real complaint, which is admittedly quite nitpicky, is that the colours can sometimes push slightly too far into oversaturated, even when it's set to its more muted natural mode. Oranges and reds can end up blowing out a bit and losing some of the detail. Now, it's also equipped with high refresh capabilities up to 120Hz, although being a mid-range device means you don't get the super responsive adaptive capabilities which would allow it to increase or drop incrementally based on the type of content displayed. Instead, it mostly jumps between 60 and 120Hz. Now, it may not have a flagship level Snapdragon chipset inside, but the mid-tier Exynos processor in here is more than capable of handling most people's demands. It'll run games smoothly, and while resolution drops a little on some of the more intense games to preserve smoothness, for the most part I have no complaints. I turned in a good amount of time on Mario Kart Tour Mobile and it ran pretty much flawlessly. One of the telltale signs that this is a mid-range device is that loading apps and games doesn't feel instant, but it never left us waiting to the point of frustration. In fact, if you've never used a top-level Android phone, this won't be an issue. That's not to say the entire phone experience was always zippy and fast. As we've noticed in a number of recent A-series models over the past couple of years, there are times where the stutter and lag can creep in. Usually it's when swiping out of an app to go back to the home screen, or scrolling up and down within third-party apps. It just leaves a feeling of not being quite speedy, fluid, and smooth enough. And that's not just comparing to more expensive flagship phones. When you compare that side of things with the competition from the likes of Poco with its competitive F-series models, or the OnePlus Nord models, which pride themselves on having that responsive, smooth user interface, there's a noticeable difference here. It's certainly an area that Samsung could improve on. Battery life, however, is very strong. Samsung's marketing talks up a big 2-day battery, but in our experience it likely won't be a full 48 hours for anyone between charges, but it's not miles off. With my own typical usage, which usually consisted of around 3 hours of mixed usage in the day, split between gaming, social media, web browsing and music listening, it would leave me with about 40% left over at the end of the day. This was with taking the phone off at about 8 AM and going to bed at 11 o'clock at night. Let's talk cameras, and just like its more expensive S-branded siblings, the A53 features a neat trio of cameras on the back. Only 2 of those are really useful, however, with the third being a 5 megapixel macro. With macro mode enabled, you can get really close to small objects and focus and take a picture from a few centimeters away, but the results do leave a lot to be desired. Photos from that macro camera are just a bit rough looking because of the lower resolution sensor, so there's a bit of a lack of detail, especially when compared to the other 2 cameras. So really you have 2 cameras to play with, or at least 2 that you'll spend the most time using. On the whole, the photos delivered from the A54 are strong for the market that they're in. In that classic Samsung style, in bright daylight, you'll get photos that are very colourful and contrast rich. Even with Samsung's aggressive scene optimizer disabled, you'll still get really saturated colours. And there's no doubt in my mind, having tested the cameras, that the primary lens is the strongest of the 3. It copes a lot better with contrasting highlights and shadows than the ultra-wide lens does. It's a good camera and focuses and processes images quickly. If we have any criticism, is that Samsung's processing on the A54 specifically seems to introduce a bit too much contrast. Even subtle shadows become dark, where darker parts of backgrounds become so crushed at times that they lose texture. This seemed to happen mostly when there was a particularly bright spot in the image, almost as if in its attempt to reduce the highlights to retain detail, it's dropped the brightness and exposure levels everywhere else a bit too much. Doesn't seem to want to elevate the shadows at all and reduced highlights at the same time. The ultra-wide by comparison seems to struggle a little and often overexposes the images so that brighter parts of the images are blown out and lose their detail. Indoors, away from bright lighting, the additional contrast we found in most images makes shadows and darker areas quite grainy and noisy. On the video side though, there's plenty here to offer a good experience, mainly being able to shoot in 4K, but also having a stabilizing feature built into the software that you can just toggle on. With it switched on, video becomes much smoother, although a little grainier. I've come away from my time with the Galaxy A54 in a bit of a conundrum. On the one hand, I have a great big device with a vibrant display and good battery. It also has strong cameras too, to an extent. But at its price range, it has a lot of competition. Look at the pixel range from Google, and you can either spend similar money or a little more if there's no sale, and get the Pixel 7, which has excellent cameras and offers a clean, fluid, bloat-free software experience. Or you can spend less and get the Pixel 6a. Now, I'd argue that the A54 has a stronger display and battery than either of those Pixels, but Google's phones are more competitively priced given the rest of their strengths, particularly when you look at the software and the camera experiences. Likewise, there are the likes of the OnePlus Nord 2T and the Poco F4, which offer faster, more responsive and smoother experiences for less money than the Galaxy A54. Samsung's latest A50 series is still the phone to get if you want a long-lasting phone with a big bright screen that's great for consuming media. With a more restrained approach to software and more consistently smooth user interface, it could be an incredible mid-range device. As it is, it's just good. I've been Cam. Let me know what you think of the A54 in the comments down below. If you did like this video, please do leave a thumbs up, subscribe and tap the notification bell, and then you won't miss any of our uploads. I'll see you again in the next one. Bye for now.